Justin Trudeau's arguments for a carbon tax, let alone his increase, are starting to fall apart, just as they always were, but now Canadians are speaking up more than ever, and so are some premiers. Let's get into it.
Oh, yeah!
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. The carbon tax seems to be all we're talking about over the last week, ever since Justin Trudeau's infamous April Fools, where he raised the price of the federal carbon tax 23%. Now, while Justin's been touring the country for the last week, talking about useless school programs that are merely a distraction and avoiding the actual root of the problem that really resides with the fact that parents can't afford lunch for their children simply because of things like Justin Trudeau's I guess you could say boot on everybody's throat, stopping them from affording the ability to feed their children. Well, now we're seeing it revolve around the blame game, as Justin Trudeau has been often saying this week, that it's up to provinces, that provinces have the right to raise their own carbon tax ahead of a federal backstop, which basically is useless at this point because unless you're going to match or do more than what the federal government is, the federal government is saying they're essentially going to come in and instill what is currently in place. So really, there is no solution other than going along with Justin's silly cash grab, his tax scam. We're seeing that more and more now that people are starting to get involved, as over the weekend, we can see this video here from the pleb. Canadian farmers in Alberta are out protesting Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. Again, the protesters haven't backed down since April 1st. We can see people all over the country who are protesting. We've seen footage from Ottawa. We've seen footage in Alberta where jackbooted RCMP thugs are showing up with assault-style weapons. Well, now the farmers are getting involved because farmers simply can't afford to get their product to market anymore under Justin Trudeau's regime and overcharging of taxes. It's going to continue to grow, and it's going to be interesting to see where things go. Now, people have been saying for a while now, I'm hearing nothing coming from these premiers that are usually vocal, like Danielle Smith. I'm curious what their stance is on all of this. And while it's not necessarily the reaction people are looking for, premiers typically stay out of the drama, but when it comes to Danielle Smith, we've seen Justin Trudeau holding a press conference earlier this week stating that Danielle Smith had no rights to call for a meeting, that she had no rights to request to sit down with Justin Trudeau because there was a meeting back in 2016, long before she was the Premier of Alberta, where the carbon initiatives were discussed. And what he really is saying when he makes that argument is that there really is no basis for his current carbon taxing. That if he were to sit down, he simply has no legs to stand on, because every point she's going to bring up is one that's relevant. But I wanted to cover this article so that people understand just what is going on. Danielle Smith, again, has issued a letter to the Prime Minister's office, and we're going to go over that as well. But let's take a look at what is transpiring here. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says, although she once spoke positively of carbon rebates, the rising cost of federal levy means Prime Minister Justin Trudeau can no longer justify it. United Conservative Premier was responding to Trudeau's comments earlier Friday that she appeared to have flip-flopped on the issue. If he has to point to a comment I made 3 years ago, it clearly shows he can't defend his current position. Smith told an unrelated news conference in Brooks, Alberta, he's continued to pile on additional costs over the last few years, which has completely changed the calculus. On the weekend, Federal Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault posted a video on social media of Smith speaking in 2021 about the benefits of revenue-neutral carbon pricing. In it, Smith said she received rebates that were greater than the carbon charge she paid for things like natural gas and fuel. I would say that I probably ended up better off with that transfer, she said at the time. However, on Friday, Smith noted the most recent increase put the carbon price at $80 per ton, beginning April 1st, up from $65 per ton. He throws his argument out the window, said Smith, adding that when she made her previous comments, she was comparing Trudeau's plan to that of the Alberta NDP, which had only rebated a portion of revenues to from low to middle income earners when it was in the government. Soon after the former UCP Premier Jason Kenney, killed the NDP's consumer carbon pricing program in 2019, the province was forced to accept Ottawa's levy. Trudeau said Friday the Liberal government designed its carbon pricing program to combat climate change and put more money into the pockets of Canadians. Well, we all know that's false. We all know that claim is absolutely horse manure. He said that 8 out of 10 families get more in rebates than they pay. And that's an interesting statement to make because essentially we know that in order to qualify for that benefit, at least from what I understand, and again, I could be wrong, it's speculation based on what I've been told, but it's my understanding that a family that has a combined income of more than $50,000 a year does not get a rebate back. Now, what he's basically saying here is that 8 out of 10 families in Canada are making less than $50,000 a year if that claim is accurate. And if that's the case, as I said on Friday night's stream here on Friday Night Fringe, I don't know who can live on that. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like the only people that are getting these rebates are either people who are collecting very low amounts of money, we'll say, that could be government money as well. I'm not sure if that plays a part in it, or people on minimum wage. I'm going to choose to believe Danielle Smith of a few years ago before she started playing politics, Trudeau said. Later Friday, Trudeau told a business audience in Calgary that there are always going to be areas in which he and Smith disagree, sometimes spectacularly. But he said the federal government would be there for Albertans. No, they won't. No matter what the premier says, no matter how much she is poking at me, I'm not walking away from Alberta. Justin Trudeau, you walked away from Alberta years ago when you killed every pipeline project that was coming out of the province. You cost this province thousands of jobs. You dismantled all of its main exports, I guess you could say. Yeah, you sure don't want to walk away from Alberta. Smith, along with the premiers of Ontario, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Labrador, have written open letters in recent days asking for Trudeau to convene a First Minister's meeting on the federal levy. The carbon tax has contributed to increasing stress and financial pain for millions of Canadians, Smith wrote the Prime Minister, on Thursday. In his letter to Trudeau on Friday, Ottawa Premier Doug Ford wrote, "While we all have a role in protecting the environment, it cannot be done on the backs of hardworking people." Trudeau turned down the call for a meeting on Friday. Again, this is a sign of his backpedaling on his claims because he doesn't have a leg to stand on. There's power in numbers, and when 7 of 10 premiers are all standing over his desk saying, you need to do something about this, he'd have nowhere to go. So of course he's going to do what he's best at, run and hide. We had a meeting on carbon pricing and every single premier came together to work on establishing the pan-Canadian framework on climate change years ago, Trudeau said. And part of it was that there would be a federal backstop to make sure the pollution wasn't free anywhere across the country. Again, this is playing the blame game. Justin Trudeau is very good at the blame game. He won't simply just say, you know what, we had a pandemic. We've been spending money like crazy. We have billion-dollar slush funds. I've been going on $80,000 Christmas vacations. Maybe this carbon tax isn't so good. But I wanted to take a look at Danielle Smith's letter. Because while most people say, hey, she hasn't addressed the RCMP, she hasn't addressed the protests, well, there's a reason for that. The RCMP are a federal police force. The highway that they're protecting is a federal highway. This has nothing to do with Danielle Smith's jurisdiction. And if you remember the Freedom Convoy, well, technically, Justin Trudeau is not allowed to give orders to the RCMP. So this is orders coming from their high-ups, I guess? But nonetheless, Danielle Smith is concerned about what Albertans are going through. Dear Prime Minister, Albertans and Canadians are facing a cost of living crisis not seen in decades and are struggling with severe financial pressures due to crippling inflation and high interest rates. Yet your government insists on increasing these costs further to the most recent increase of your punitive carbon tax on April 1st of 2024. Alberta has been calling on the federal government to eliminate the carbon tax since 2019. The carbon tax has contributed to increasing stress and financial pain for millions of Canadians. The carbon tax on a net basis will cost Alberta households more than $900 this year if the tax remains implemented. The federal government's own parliamentary budget officer has also said that the net cost to Alberta households will be more than triple in the next 6 years to a staggering expense of $2,700 by 2030 to 2031. In March, natural gas was selling less than $1.80 a gigajoule Now that the carbon tax has increased, it's at $4.09 per gigajoule, almost 3 times the price. That's disgusting. This tax alone is more than double what it costs Albertans to heat their homes. This is not just reckless, it is immoral and it is inhumane. Again, she has a very good point. Natural gas, heating, electricity, water, those should all be essential things, should they not? Yet you're gouging people for profit. Alberta is already making significant progress in emissions reduction without compromising jobs and hurting the industries that have created so much wealth and prosperity for our country. And that's an important claim. Again, I know I'm cutting into this letter, but again, I want to stress. I think that when you talk about a carbon tax, when you talk about these levies, if Trudeau was really concerned about the environment, if this wasn't about money for waste, money for special interest groups, monies for friends of the Trudeaus and bureaucracy, then they would install something on the provinces to say that a certain amount of their budget must go towards environmental work. If you could prove that you were doing things like Danielle Smith has said, of course, we're building a hydrogen plant, a mass hydrogen plant right now, north of Edmonton. You would think things like that would please a government that wants to truly save the environment. But no, they'll tax you. And much like the pandemic, I always said that the government cannot stop you from getting sick, just like money from the government cannot stop the environment from changing. Our province has a long history of climate action, and with more than 2 decades of programs and policies that have led emissions reductions and inspired other jurisdictions to follow our lead, Alberta has some of the cleanest practices in the world. We're already an emissions reduction and energy development plan that will enable our province to achieve carbon neutral economy by 2050. Again, that's without compromising anything. If the federal government is going to say that affordability is a top priority, they must match the words with action. This means working with the provinces to ease Canadians' burdens, reduce emissions, and strengthen the Canadian economy. Earlier this week, my colleagues, Dr. Andrew Furey, Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, and Blaine Higgs, Premier of New Brunswick, urged you to summon a meeting of Canada's first ministers to discuss the carbon tax and its impact on Canada's economy and people. And again, I mentioned earlier that the panel was with Premier Furey. I think it was Premier Higgs. Again, we've done so much carbon tax stuff. While I'm filming this, I'll apologize if I've gotten the premiers mixed up there. So we've urged you to summon a meeting of Canada's first ministers to discuss the carbon tax and its impact on Canada's economy and people. I support their position and join them in urging you to act immediately and convene a first ministers meeting to discuss the impact of the carbon tax and any proposed alternatives. Again, all seems very rational, doesn't it? This is a government, and this is where a lot of people say, well, I don't follow provincial politics. I don't listen to those things. What you should see here are premiers that are actually interested in doing their jobs. Why? Because, well, their jobs are being threatened. They're not going to be able to keep their jobs, even liberal premiers, when it comes time for re-election. If these carbon taxes continue to push and infringe on people's abilities in order to provide for their families, in order to keep their lights on, in order to heat their homes, feed their families, buy clothing for their children, send them to school with a full lunch bag, the list goes on. I don't know anybody who would want to vote for any prime minister, any premier, any MP that does not have the interests of their constituents at heart. But let me know what you guys think down below. Is Danielle Smith taking the right moves? Is she pushing the way everybody expects her to push when it comes to the carbon tax? I feel personally like this letter is her way of protesting the carbon tax, similar to how those are protesting out on the highways. And I again think that Danielle, while hasn't been vocal in terms of specifically saying she agrees with those protests, is showing by her own metrics just how much she supports everyone's rights to live a fruitful life and have some money in their pockets. But again, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think down below. Give me your comments. Let me know where you think this is headed. What do you think is going to happen with farmers joining the protest? Is it going to get nastier? Let me know if it's your first time here. I hope this video has earned your subscription. Make sure as you're hitting that subscribe button, click on your bell for notifications. Join us live. And again, as earlier I mentioned, join us live every Friday for Friday Night Fringe, where we're going to go over everything that happened this week, everything coming up in the week ahead, and a little bit of back and forth with the community. I had such a blast talking with you all last week, and I always look forward to seeing everyone there as well as our new viewers. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll catch you on the next one.